All right, and we are live. Hello, everybody. So, my, hello, everybody. My name is Heather Butts with Health for Youth, and we are back for
All
another
right,
episode.
and we are
Stop
live.
that. Hold on a
Hello,
second.
everybody.
That always happens.
I know it does. It does. Okay, we should be good. All right. Sorry, everybody. Third time's a charm. Hello, everybody. This is Heather Butts with Health for Youth, and we are here with another episode of our college readiness. And of course, we are here with the always fantabulous Satanji Agosa. So today we're going to be on for about half an hour, and we're going to talk about creating your college list. And basically, it's summertime. As we're recording this, it is June 2nd, 2024. And so students are starting to, get ready to get their summers going if they're not already out of school for the summer. And so, especially if you're a junior or you're a sophomore, or you're rising junior, rising sophomore, rising senior, you should start thinking a little bit about the college list process and what that looks like and how you can create it. So I'm going to first turn it over to Satanji to talk a little bit about why a college list is so important, what that looks like, and then we'll talk about the ins and outs of how you actually create it.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. So, obviously, a lot of what we talk about is figuring out not just, this blanket statement. How do you make a list? How do you, pick a school? But really about when we say the you, it's about the individual process for the person and what it looks like to assess like what your interests are, where you are in terms of what your goals are, and then how you go about doing the research to match yourself to the schools and universities that are of interest to you and the goals that you're trying to attain over the next few years. So I think that's always a good place to start in grounding the conversation and the uniqueness for every person. So when we're speaking in generalities, it's about trying to figure out how do you tailor this to who you are and what's going to help you achieve your goals. And so I think there is a lot of like first self-assessment, right? And that we're trying to talk to the youth who are interested in potentially doing a 2-year, 4-year program, and understanding the differences between what those, degrees offer you, how quickly, the investment time, the investment of money that it'll take to get to achieving the goals. So I think there's a lot of like self-work that hopefully you're doing with your guidance counselors on, what are my goals? Do I want to become a professional that takes, the degrees take 8 years to attain? Maybe that's medical school and becoming a doctor. Do I want to become, do a trade school, process and then maybe go and do a shorter term program where then you end up with certifications to do electrician, to be electrician or plumber or something more, manual with your trade? Do you want to find something in between because you don't really know? So you're trying to go to a liberal arts school where you can explore some things and get exposure to different programs and then decide from there based on getting more knowledge. Because as we know, obviously, your schools are hopefully preparing you to be good students in college, but they may not be able to prepare you for what your like desired career looks like because, other than maybe career days, there's not a lot of like opportunity to learn about careers unless you're taking the added initiative to go and do internships throughout the year. So I think there's a lot of like that internal research or just or searching of just understanding what feels like a right way, or what your goals are around going to the next level of school after college. And so once you have a little bit of a list on what that looks like, right? If you've said, hey, I think I want to do a 4-year program, or I want to do a 2-year program because I'd like to be able to get into the workforce really quickly, or I really want to, be in a new environment and I want to go like travel and be away from home and be in a different state. Those are some of the things I recommend that people start to assess, like what they want to study, where they might want to do it, and how long, like what their longer term goals are. And if you have still open-ended questions, that's fine, but just doing a little bit of that assessment, because the point that we're trying to get to is where you can then start to weed out the schools based on like, hey, I don't want to travel far. I need to start looking at, the 100 schools within my city. I don't want to study science. I really want to focus on theater. So I need to focus on the 5 schools in my area that focus on that. Um, I'm looking for a college where I can commute from home and go back home and be able to focus and have a side job on a job on the side. And I don't really want to live on a campus, or I can't afford to live on a campus right now. Those are the things that you kind of need to do so that when we're actually doing the process of setting our safety school, our reach schools, and then our match schools, that we then assess like, hey, what are those, how do these line up based on what I said I'm interested in attaining. So I think there's, like I said, there's a self-work, and then there starts to be like, here's my criteria that I've outlined based on that. And I can now see how these schools measure up one-to-one on like what I'm looking for. That's how I would say we'd start the conversation. I don't know. What do you think, Heather?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think, there's a couple of things to unpack in what you talked about. So the first is just how do you assess what is a reach match safety school for you, right? And there's a couple of ways that people do that. The easiest being your SAT scores and your grades. So, if you have a 1200 on the SATs and you have a 3.4 average and you're interested in going to Duke, I mean, you have to think about that a little bit. The SAT scores and GPA for higher for Duke, um, on average are higher than that. Now, averages and means and medians are all just that, right? You get some people that are higher, you get some people that are lower, then in between is where most people are falling. So it's not to say that with those grades and SAT scores, you cannot get into Duke. And I always that's why we have reach schools, right? But at least what you're working with. Conversely, if you had the same GPA and SAT scores and you're looking at, Hostos Community College, you got a good shot. You got a very good shot, right? I would also say, one thing that I think people don't do so much with grades and SATs is to really kind of think about um why they are looking at certain schools if they have certain grades and GPAs one way or the other. So, if you're 1200 SATs and 3.4 average and you're looking at like a tier 4 school, I would say to you, I hope you're looking at that for a safety reason and that you're looking at other schools that are um more in line with your SAT and GPAs. So that those scores can be very helpful to you as you start to think a little bit in terms of what schools make sense for you, what are true reaches, what are true matches, what are true safeties, and then sort of, act accordingly in terms of what all that looks like, and then be able to, because to me, you know, make making a college list the bare minimum is just to sort of sort through what we just talked about. That doesn't even get into what's a good fit for you, what's a good feel for you, what school sort of speaks to you, where are some of the professors you want to work with, what are the schools that have your major that you're interested in. We're first just talking bare minimum. These are the schools that make sense for you based on where you might get in, where you might not get in, where you almost definitely will get in. That's what we're trying to figure out, just base level.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe we define like, so for example, safety schools are supposed to be those that, hey, based on my academic standing, which is what I'm going to be potentially evaluated on, and my extracurriculars, where would it be like a shoe-in that I'll get into? Oftentimes, regardless of your grade point average, those can maybe your community college that's local, or your state schools, depending on, their ranking, that anybody, making sure that you have committed yourself to 4 years of high school and things, that they are open doors because they see the value in giving the student an education, and that the barriers to entry are less so, right? And that's what makes it's so important that we all have that there is access to local schools because they do provide a lot of more flexibility oftentimes. Then you have match schools, which are schools where, hey, there might be a little bit more of, a higher criteria of who they're admitting into the school based on their academic standing in high school across the 4 years. But then there still is that flexibility to say, hey, we understand that at some point in your school career, it might not have been all A pluses, right? And that there is that flexibility based on maybe where your SAT scores or your ACT scores stand, that they, in your written submissions, maybe that stuff provides a little bit more color into your application. And then there's the last part, which is reach, which are these schools that are particularly have very low admittance rates because they, receive lots and lots of applicants. And I think it's only getting, harder and harder every year. The admissions rate for many of these schools is getting smaller and smaller, and they're admitting fewer and fewer students. And I think it's just kind of a weird and sad place to be where it's like 3.5%, of students or 3.3% who apply to Harvard are getting in nowadays, or 8.7% of kids who apply to go to UCLA are getting in. It's getting so competitive, not only because I think for the better, right, that there are more kids who have access to actually even applying, so the numbers just sway in that they can't admit all of them, but that there is that level of like, this is a really competitive place to get into, and it doesn't always mean that it's going to be the best experience for you. So I think that's the important thing, is that just because you get into schools that are harder to get into doesn't mean it's the right fit for you. It just is now where things are shaking out, that more people can apply to these schools, more people have access to apply, and so the admittance rate is going to get smaller and smaller. So I think it's really important to understand the difference between safety, match, and reach schools. But as Heather was saying, right, there's also those elements that come in about the other criteria that go beyond you just assessing, hey, what do I want and what do I think my grades can get me? But like, what can I afford, right? Academic require, the financial element piece of it, right? What schools are giving me financial aid? What schools will offer scholarships? How cost effective would it be to go to a state school versus a private school? And, I think a lot of that I try not to like, people might say, hey, I just can't afford it because my family makes this amount. I think the important thing is actually that a lot of schools now have, if you do the FAFSA and you fill out these like free assessment forms for your financial aid criteria, you might learn more about what you are qualified for in terms of getting some grants and scholarship money applied towards your tuition that make it more affordable than even schools that have smaller endowments where they don't get as much money. So I say financial considerations is important. And as someone who took out loans, I think it's very, very important that you be mindful of like, being considerate of what you do or do not want to commit yourself to, especially as a 17, 18-year-old kid. But it isn't just that the sticker price for a school is the actual price you'll pay. So I think that's kind of sometimes my lowest criteria for how we start and set up not lowest, but among the lower end before you decide to choose. I think setting up the list, it's something to be mindful of, but you don't count it out because you haven't gotten actually the package yet. That's when you then decide that's when financial aid moves to the top, because you actually have the numbers in front of you versus guessing. I think your commitment to actually the process, right? Because you can see before applying how much they're going to ask you of. So some schools are saying, hey, we're still flexible on SAT, ACT. Okay, if you're going to take that, then that's great. Now you know that all the schools that require it, they can still be in your list. If you're not going to take it, then you might have to remove some schools that say they need it from your list. How much you're committed to. I remember when I was applying, there were some schools that were like, we need 3 supplemental essays on top of our standard essay. And you have to be real with yourself so that you don't, sort of have too many balls you're juggling. What are you committed to writing? What is your process going to look like? Are you going to be looking for schools that have pretty similar questions so that you can then, fill out applications at one time and really just like bunch your application process, or are you committed to being like, hey, if I have to write 7 essays, I'm going to write them? And that's like that self-awareness part, because you want to make sure that if you start an application, you're able to finish it. And then like, I think it's really, really important to just talk to the people around you as well about what are the other, what are these personal preferences that I should be mindful of? Like, am I able to go and live somewhere far away from family? Will I feel comfortable with that? Is my family supportive of that? Will I go to a school that has 30,000 kids versus 5,000, 10,000? What do I think my comfort level that I'm going to be able to thrive in an environment will afford me, so that when you are looking at schools, even if they do look interesting, even if they do have your major, even if they, have a cool sports program, but they're like 50,000 students on a campus or on a couple of campuses, and you're like, that's just like too big. I've only ever gone to schools where, my biggest class is like 500 students. Sometimes there's that awareness. I knew that I didn't want to go to school that was too large, because I was just used to having a community that I could be comfortable with, that I could build with, that I wasn't just one of many. Whereas other people thrive in that and they can find ways to succeed regardless. So I think there's a lot of like, as you're making these criteria, I would say that we recommend looking through what's the academic requirements to get into these schools, right? And how do you match up, so that you can then maybe assess which one falls into reach, which one falls into safety, which one falls into match. And then going into like, just like what that process will look like. Are they asking me for a bunch of, essays? Are they asking me for things that I am able and willing to produce? What are my personal preferences around like what the school is going to offer me? I want to study abroad. I knew I wanted to study abroad. I couldn't go to a school that didn't have a study abroad program. Rule those ones out. And then, then we also look, as we said, about the financial commitments and what does it seem like these schools often afford? What are their statistic rates on how much financial aid they give students each year? And how does that then match or not match with what my family can afford?
Yep. So, I think two things to think about are one, again, the economic piece, which you mentioned, and in another session, we'll definitely spend some more time talking about that. And then just definition. So, for example, you mentioned, well, what if the school is too far for you? You got to think about that. That is a very subjective comment. I often tell the story about a student I worked with years ago who said that he needed to be exactly 30 miles from home, and he lived in Edison, New Jersey. And the only two schools at that point are Rutgers and Princeton. And most people aren't going to sort of be like, yeah, I'm definitely going to Princeton. So basically, he was looking at Rutgers. And so when I asked him what his number one school was, he said, oh, University of Texas at Austin. And I said, well, my friend, that's a little bit more than 30 miles away from Edison, New Jersey. Come to find out, it's basically, his mom. His mom had just put, because a 16-year-old is going to talk like that. They're not going to say, I want to be 30 miles from home, nanu, nanu. Like, they're not going to do any of that, right? So when you get to it, it's the mom. Mom wants him to live at home, be at home, go to Rutgers, go to a state school, save the money. But he didn't want to do any of that, right? So then talk to him a little bit more, and then you start to get to, he doesn't really want to be close to
Mhm.
home, close to home. But close to home for him was he didn't really want to live at home. He wanted to live in a dorm. Now, there's lots of places in the New York, New Jersey area that you could live that aren't at home. You could potentially still be in a dorm. So it was parsing through all of that to get to what the real story was. But if you listen to him and you didn't really dig very deeply, all you would get was, I want to be 30 miles from home and I live in Edison, New Jersey. So
Mhm.
the first thing is just sort of starting to figure out what people mean. I want to go to a big school. I want to go to a small school. I want to go to school that's close to home. I want to go to school that's far from home. That's going to mean something different to every single person. Some people live in New York and Hawaii is too close. Like, oh, that's too close. That's in the United States. Oh, okay. Well, Hawaii is further away than France, but you knock your socks off. You do you. So you got to just sort of figure out what people are talking about, right? And so that goes to what you're saying, which is, really delving into it. And then the other thing, and I mean, this is sort of my mantra. It's sort of like the hill that I will, stand on, is visiting colleges. I
Yeah.
mean, during COVID, that was really rough for students to not to be able to visit schools. But in the post-COVID era, I personally, I think your top three schools you got to visit. You
Yeah.
cannot be walking onto a campus September 1st, like, here I am. I'm ready. That's just not That's not the vibe. So you want to visit these schools, at least I mean, I would say visit as many as you can, but if you know there's constraints on that, there's monetary issues, at least your first top three schools you got to visit because there's no amount of like us sitting here talking to you about it or people sort of like, hearing from their cousin or their friend or their aunt about how good or bad a school is that's gonna have as much sway as you actually just being on campus and being there for more than a couple of hours. I mean, being there for some solid time, which
Mhm.
means you have to organize your schedule accordingly so you can have that time. These are all the things that will go into creating an actual list that you can actually be proud of and be excited about going to college.
Yeah, I agree with the last point about the visits. I think it's not just seeing what you get to see, but really getting to talk to people, and hear how they, how they feel about the school. That's like firsthand knowledge. Is just like, what is your experience like based on how long you've been here? What have you found pleasant? What have you found stifling? What have you found that you were so surprised by? And I think those are the types of questions that I encourage people to ask if they're going to do a college visit, and or if they're doing a college webinar where, the schools invite a couple of students to talk. Maybe you can't afford to go and visit the schools in person. I know I wasn't able to. I would say one, if you're going to do the virtual option, you ask the real questions. You ask, hey, what are the things that you didn't really expect that you don't love about the school, and hope that the person answers honestly, or that you ask the school themselves if they can afford, if they can provide any financial aid to come visit, because I think that's something that maybe is underutilized, that you might not know. They might not publicize that they provide students with some sort of stipend if write that you can't afford it, or maybe there's an application to go and see a school that might be upstate or that might be out of state. Because those things can be really, really helpful in terms of like just really assessing how you feel in real time in a place. You can say, hey, I think I like schools that, do this because it looks glitz and glam. But then you get there and you're like, oh, these students don't really, they're not very like personable. Everyone's kind of stuck up. Everyone's a little bit, in their own world, and they don't really see it, and that might not be comforting for your personality, or that they don't have, a certain sort of campus activity, or they don't have a campus sort of, they might say online that they have all of these things, and then you get there and they're like, oh, actually that's been inactive for a few years. So then you're like, oh, I guess this is not necessarily the place that I'll be able to do my theater,
Yeah,
program.
they don't have a theater department anymore.
Exactly. So there's just a lot of questions that can get answered in real time if you're able to see something in person. And as Heather said, I think it might not be every school. Hopefully, through your school, you're able to go and do college tours, but I think it's important that you also incorporate your family and say, hey, who do I know in certain states that maybe I wanted to explore schools in North Carolina, and I have an aunt there who, my mom can send me there, that maybe she can take me. Or, that I can go with a friend because we're both interested in that school. How can our families coordinate a trip where it makes sense for both of us to go and see the school now that we're really committed to applying? I would say that my process was building out the list first in some sense, just because again of the financial constraint. I like looked at what I thought I could get into, how I fit into each of these criterias, what schools felt most exciting for me, what schools felt like they both had the academic, programs that made sense for what I was looking for. And then my family and I decided that I wouldn't go and see a school unless either they had paid for it financially to let me, the school had offered some sort of stipend, or that I had gotten in already, which meant that I wasn't going until like April, May, or April of the year that I had to actually commit to the school. And that was my process. And then my school did do some college visits, but I don't think I chose any of those schools to be on my list. They helped inform my list. They were like, oh, this is a good school. I think we went to like George Washington University, right? And so we all went to DC. And I knew I didn't want to be in DC because I didn't really love that. Like it felt like a very political area, even though I studied public policy. And I knew that that wasn't necessarily the town I wanted to be in, but I liked the feel of schools with a campus. I like the feel of a school of that size. And so that helped me shape my school list, but it wasn't a school that ended up on my actual list to apply to. So you can get a lot of information even from schools that are more local if you can't visit the schools that you want to go to if they're further away until after you get into the school. Because now you know, hey, I'm at least admitted. So it makes sense for me to go see it before I finally commit to it. So that was my process a little bit. You know, I kind of did it a both and go see some schools beforehand, and then the schools that I really thought I wanted to go to that were in my top five, maybe then I saw them after the fact of getting in because it made sense to make that financial investment from my parents' perspective.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got about 2 minutes left.
Mhm.
So, what are some takeaways that you think students should have from this session? And then we'll tell you about our next session, which is exciting.
Yes. So I think the takeaways are one, the options are endless, which can be overwhelming, but also if you start to sharpen what your vision is for yourself and for what you're looking for, the options shrink pretty quickly, right? And so that is like a good place to start. Knowing that you have a lot of options at your hands should be empowering, but also that you then have the power to shrink that list to be very thoughtful about what you're looking for and that it is an individual process. This is going to be very individual. It's about being real about your grades, being real about what you're looking for out of like what you're interested in exploring academically moving forward, real about the application process and what you're able to and willing to commit, right? How many essays you're willing to write, what sort of deadlines each of those propose, what sort of, we didn't really touch on it, but like if you're trying to apply early versus you're applying regular, you know, knowing those timelines so that you can say, okay, I need to shift my focus onto like 4 schools max, 2 of them being safety, 2 of them being match, and one being a reach, like or 5 schools. So like figuring out what that sort of equation looks like. And then also being able to do some of the visiting because seeing things firsthand is going to be the most important thing to helping you really feel confident about your decision before going and like signing on the dotted line. I think all things after that with financial aid are conversations that are not just independent. They're a conversation that you must have with like family and those who are gonna like help support you through that process of like putting money forward or taking out loans on your behalf. So I think there is both the individual process of knowing what you want and then the like community process, your guidance counselors, your teachers, your family members, and getting their support and buy-in on what your vision is. Because if you can sell your vision to anyone else, then like I think you'll know that you're on the right path, right? If someone else can understand why you're thinking about what you're doing, then that's like a good place to start, no matter what that looks like. If it's like, hey, I want to go and be electrician. I really want to get out there in the field and make money. And I think this is a good path for me. And I'm really good with my hands and this and that. Then like if someone you can sell that to somebody, then like, hey, then maybe you know that you're affirming yourself in the right way. And then if it's like, hey, I want to go and study, you know, theater, and this is the school that's going to afford me that best opportunity. And here's what I'm thinking. Here's what's going to make me grow. And on the side, I'm going to also study economics. Like that's a vision and not everybody will buy into it or get it, but I think if you can convey it, then that's the good place to be when you're trying to think of like what is the list of schools based on what is my vision for myself.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really great note to end on. And I say this to students all the time. You know, they say they have like issues with their parents and the parents don't listen. And I'm like, how did you come to your parents? Did you come like, well, I mean, I want to become an actress and it's gonna be amazing? Or were you like, I'm gonna be an electrician. Here's the 18 places I'm gonna apply. I've done my due diligence, I've done my research. I know that in 20 years I can make this amount of money, blah, blah, blah. I don't know one parent. I legit don't know one parent that if you came at a parent and you had your act together, you had your plan in order, you had like a 10, 20, 30, 80-year visioning plan. I don't know one parent that's going to say anything. And they'd be like, good luck, future George Clooney or future Aretha Franklin. Uh, I'm sure, hope it works out for you. I support you. Right. And even students who, you know, sort of sort of like not fully sort of like formulated idea about something that is sort of tried and true, most parents are not going to be excited about that. You're like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. Okay, well, have you taken chemistry, bio, anything? I'll be a doctor to be fine. I don't know any parent that's going to be excited about that. So if you have a plan of action, if you've done your homework, if you've done your due diligence, if you know where you're headed, if you know how to get there, most families I know will be supportive. What happens though is a lot of times, young people kind of just float into stuff and then parents get nervous. They get anxious. That's what I hear from parents. I don't feel good about this. Like, I don't feel like, this is really where it's going to head. So being able to have a fully formulated plan, taking action for it, most families will be right there with you.
Yeah.
All right. So we are done for today, friend, but we will be back in a few weeks. I know, I know. So we'll be back in 3 weeks with the fabulous Joe Barata. You will learn more about him when you meet him, if you're here, which you should be with us. And he's going to talk about college athletes and also talk about the SAT process. So we look forward to seeing you at that. Thank you, Satanji, as always. And we'll see you in 3 weeks. Bye bye.